Way back over 100 years ago, a poet wrote a prayer, but it wasn't just any prayer. It was a prayer for the very soul of a nation. It's a call to wake up, to step into what he called a heaven of freedom. And honestly, it's a call that feels surprisingly urgent even today. So let's dive in and really unpack what that vision was all about. Just let that line sit with you for a second. Where the mind is without fear, the head is held high. Wow. Who could have written something so timeless, so powerful? What kind of world were they really dreaming of when they put those words on paper? Well, the person behind these powerful words was Rabindranath Tagore, and he was a true force of nature from India. I mean, calling him a poet is just scratching the surface. He was a social reformer, a philosopher, a painter, a music composer, a true polymath. He was an absolutely monumental figure in the early 20th century, and his influence went far, far beyond just the written word. And when we say he had a lot of talents, that is almost an understatement. The sheer scale of his work is just astounding. Tagore didn't just write poetry, he basically modernized Bengali literature, setting it free from these really rigid, old-fashioned rules. And on top of all that, he founded an experimental school, Shantiniketan, because he had this incredible vision of blending the very best of Eastern and Western thinking. He was a real bridge builder. And if you look at the key moments in his life, you really see a man of incredible conviction. In 1913, he completely shatters expectations and becomes the first non-European ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Amazing, right? 2 years later, he's knighted by the British. But then, and get this, in 1919, after the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre, he rejects that knighthood. He sends it back. That wasn't just a symbolic move. It was a loud and clear statement against colonial brutality. Now, to really get why this famous poem hits so hard, we have to understand the world he was living in. Yes, it was a world under British rule for sure, but it was also a society struggling with its own huge problems from the inside, what Tagore famously called a world of dead habit. So, what did he mean by dead habit? Well, this was his knockout metaphor for just blindly accepting tradition without ever asking why. Think about superstition, harmful social customs, and just a flat-out refusal to think critically. He saw all of this as a dreary desert sand that was literally choking the life and potential out of his country. The gap between his vision and the world he actually saw was massive. On one hand, he's praying for a world where knowledge is free for everyone. But on the other, he's seeing a reality where it's basically held hostage by the rich and powerful. He dreamed of a world that wasn't broken up by narrow domestic walls, but he lived in a nation that was deeply divided by things like caste, religion, and regionalism. And this is so crucial because it shows his criticism wasn't just aimed at the British. He was seriously worried about what was happening inside his own society, the decay of reason. He was talking about this mental fog, this stupor that had settled over people who had just stopped questioning things. Okay, so with all that context, let's circle back to the poem itself and break down what this heaven of freedom really is. Because for Tagore, freedom was a much, much bigger idea than just getting political independence. See, for Tagore, real freedom had nothing to do with fighting battles or drawing new lines on a map. No way. He couldn't have been less interested in what he called measly political definitions. For him, true freedom was something that happened on the inside. It was a state of human dignity, of intellectual weakening, and spiritual fearlessness. So these are the building blocks, the pillars of the free nation he's picturing. It's a place where people live with dignity and without fear. A place where knowledge isn't a privilege, it's a universal right. Where words come from a place of deep truth, and where people are always pushing themselves, always striving for perfection. It's a society where reason wins out over blind belief, and where our minds and our actions are constantly expanding, always growing. And this right here, this is the core struggle of the entire poem. It's the central metaphor. The ideal is this clear stream of reason. It's pure, it's flowing, it's life-giving. And the obstacle? That dreary desert sand of dead habit. It's barren, it's stagnant, it just sucks up all progress. He's basically saying that reason is the only thing, the only force that can bring a dying culture back to life. And all of this leads to the poem's powerful conclusion, which honestly feels less like an ending and more like a challenge. It's a prayer for a national awakening that you could argue we're still grappling with to this day. Tagore basically saw his country as being asleep, trapped in this nightmare of social problems and inequality. And the awakening he was praying for, it wasn't just about having some nice new ideas. It was about turning those ideas into a great river of action to actually finally reach that ideal state of freedom. And that brings us to the final, unforgettable line. It's a plea addressed to a higher power, my Father. And it's just filled with this incredible mix of hope and urgency. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. So here we are, more than 100 years after Tagore wrote those words. The prayer for a mind without fear, for a world without those narrow walls, for that clear stream of reason to win. That prayer is still here. And the question he leaves us with isn't just whether that awakening he hoped for has truly come, but maybe more importantly, what's our role in making it a reality today?